All right, welcome to your last lesson on chapter 7 and 8 where we talk about proportions. And you'll have the test next week. So one quick note here is that the presentation problem of this set is number 6. So if you haven't written that down in your planner, please do right now so that you know which problem I want to see turned in by Friday. And this is still, we're talking about interest. This is a different type of interest, compound interest. If you have questions about simple interest, make sure you put them into the form or leave a comment for me so I can help you with those problems. Because as you can imagine, simple interest is simple and compound interest is a little bit more complex. So get those questions answered and I will be able to help you with that. Now, you'll notice here, the compound interest formula over here has a lot of the same variables, but it's more complicated. So you're definitely going to need a calculator for this. So before, calculator was definitely recommended. Here it is required. So let's talk about the variables that are the same from compound interest and simple interest. The first is big T, which is just the total amount. So if you remember, that's the principal plus the added on extra interest. Principal is the same, big P. 1 plus R over N. R is still rate. It's going to be a percent in the problem. You want to type it into your calculator as a decimal. And little t is time, still measured in years. So let's talk about this new variable, N, and it shows up twice here. And what this is the number of times that the interest is, and the phrase is compounded, and what that just means is added to your total each year. Now, the number of times that it's added each year will absolutely affect the total. So if something is added annually, that's the least amount that you'll see, and this means that N is equal to 1. So if you look at this problem here, this is compounded quarterly. So you'll always see this phrase like compounded how often. And so if it's annually, that means N equals 1. Another common one is semi-annually. So that's twice a year, so N would equal 2. Quarterly, as it says here, means that N is equal to 4. You might also see monthly. Now you think, how many months are there in a year? So that means that each time out of every 12 months, the interest is added. So as you can imagine, that the bigger the N is, so bigger N, that means more interest because we're adding it on more often. So that's just a good rule of thumb. If you see something that has daily compounded interest, there's going to end up being more interest in that account. There's going to be a bigger total than for the same loan where it's compounded annually, because that's only going to have interest added on once a year. Now, here's the question. Number 1, what is different about compound interest versus simple? Here, the main difference is that interest for compound versus simple is based on the total amount, not the principal. So if you remember, simple interest was just based on the principal amount. This is based on the total here, which means that basically is that you can add interest on the interest. So if I have a 10% interest on $100, that's compounded annually. 10%, $100, after 1 year, that would then be worth $110. Next year, so if I have time, if I start with 0, no time has passed, if I have $100, after 1 year at 10%, I would have $110 because I have $10 in interest. After 2 years, 10% of this is now $11. So after 2 years, I would have $121 versus $120, which is what it would be with simple interest, because then it's just $10 every year, versus compound interest, where we're adding on based on the last total, not just the original amount. So you end up with more interest. You have a higher total with compound versus simple. That means if it's an investment, you want compound interest because that's your money, versus a loan, you don't want compound interest, or you want it compounded fewer times because then you have to pay that money back. All right, so let's use this formula. How much will you owe on a $9,000 loan with 8% interest compounded quarterly if it takes you 5 years and 6 months to pay it off? So in this case, we want to know the total. How much will you owe? And so therefore we have to know P, looking at our formula, which is 9,000, R, 8%, so 0.08, still going into decimal form. N, it's compounded quarterly, which is 4 times a year. And T, 5 years and 6 months. Now, as we said, T is always just measured in years, so we need to change months. And I would rewrite this as 5.5 years, since 6 months is half a year, 6 out of 12, which is 0.5. So now when I type this into my calculator, some of you will be able to use parentheses buttons. So if you have a calculator with parentheses, you can just type in 9,000 parentheses. So look on your calculator, see if you have it. 1 plus 0.08, that's our R, so we're right here, divided by N, which is 4, close parentheses. So if you have this, this is great. Now to do the exponent, so notice that the N times T is an exponent. You're either looking for a button with this symbol, or if you don't have that button, you might have the button here. Now, if you have this button, just click that and it'll keep typing with your parentheses. Put another parentheses on there, N again times T, which is 5.5. So if you have parentheses, this is how you want to just type it in. And of course, when you're using a calculator, still type in what you are doing so that I can follow along. Now, if you don't have this button and you have one of these and you don't have parentheses, what you want to do is make sure that you're following your order of operations. So remember, that means the order in which you do things. And you want to start with the parentheses here, which means in this case, you're going to start with, inside the parentheses, 0.8 divided by 4. Not 0.008, but just 0.08 divided by 4 inside of our parentheses, and that will equal 0.02. Then you can plus 1, so 1.02. Now you'll notice that the exponent's in another parentheses, so maybe you also do that separately as 4 times 5.5, which is 22. Then what you're going to want to do on your calculator is 1.2, and you're going to use this exponent button. So you'll type in 0.02, and then you've got y to the x, and then you'll type in the exponent that you want, which is 22. And that will give you a very long answer. That's going to give you a big decimal. Don't worry about it. Just take that answer and immediately click times 9,000. Whoop, that's 900. And that will give you the same answer that the students who had parentheses. So you have to do a couple more steps, but at least you could use your calculator. And you'll end up with 13,913.82 cents, because remember, we still are rounding to the 100th place when we talk about money. All right, last question about interest. What simple interest rate would be equivalent? So what we know here is that our total that we just found, so what we want to find is R in your simple interest formula. And so we know that the total is equal to 13,913.82. We know that the principal is going to stay the same, 9,000, and our t is going to stay the same, which is 5.5 years. So using these two together, remember t is equal to p plus I. That means that the interest is the difference between the total and the principal. So if we just subtract these two numbers, we get that the interest is equal to $13,913.82 minus 9,000, which is $4,913.82. So the equation we want to use, $4,913.82 is equal to the principal, 9,000 times R times 5.5. Multiply these two together, and we can then divide over. So 9,000 times 5.5 on our calculators is 49,500. 4,913.82. Divide each side by 49,500, and you get 0.099 for R. So that would be 9.9% as the similar rate. And so this makes sense, is what we said, that the simple interest is going to be a higher rate if it's going to get the same amount, because you owe more on compound interest, and so there's only 8% here because more interest gets added, and to be equivalent, to be equal, you have to have a higher simple interest rate. Let me know if you have questions on either of those by leaving me something in the comments. Send me an email, set up a Zoom call, and of course always fill in that form that tells me if you're stuck on any of the homework questions. I'll talk to you later.